Hello and a very warm welcome to Policy Watch, our weekly program that keeps you abreast of all the major macroeconomic developments during the week. As always, we've lined up three stories for you: the rising level of non-performing assets in banks, the launch of the first public sector women's bank, the Bharatiya Mahila Bank, and last but not the least, the Petroleum Minister Veerappa Moili's promise to deregulate diesel prices within a week. And to discuss these stories, we have with us Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, Deputy Editor, Indian Express. Welcome to the show, Subhomoy. Well, the RBI Deputy Governor K.C. Chakravarti has always been a bit of a maverick. Unlike most high functionaries at the central bank who watch their words very carefully, so carefully that listeners often come away none the wiser, DG KCC, as he is known, always calls a spade. And so it was at the recently concluded BankCon conference in Bombay, the financial capital of the country, that KCC gave a no-holds-barred speech on non-performing assets, NPAs, and laid the blame squarely on the usual whipping boys, the public sector banks. Was that a fair attack? We'll ask Subhomoy, but first, let's hear this bureau report.
Stress is growing for the banking system, and the RBI feels it has no one but itself to blame for it. According to Deputy Governor K.C. Chakrabarti, public sector banks have just been too complacent, letting non-performing assets multiply in the last 5 years. He also says they favoured large companies at the expense of small borrowers. Take a look at the figures. Total NPAs in the loan book were 12.8% in 1997 to 2001. They dropped to 3.1% in 2005 to 2009 before rising to 4.2% in 2013. In absolute terms, in 2013, NPAs are 1.93 trillion rupees, up from 50,513 crores in 2007. Of this, public sector banks that held 75.4% of the total NPAs in 2007 are today holding 86.1%. Compared to this, the NPAs of the foreign and private sector banks dropped to 1.8% from 5.5% in March 2009. From 2001 to 2013, banks wrote off over 1 trillion rupees in loans. Most of these were large companies who account for the bulk of NPAs. Less than 20% loans have been restructured, and again the benefits have gone to the industry. According to the RBI, the debt waiver for agriculture pales in comparison to the write-offs that benefited the industry. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Subhomoy, when you look at non-performing assets, why is it that the public sector banks have so much more than private sector banks? After all, the economic slowdown was across the board. So does it have something to do with their ownership? It's convenient to blame public sector banks, but perhaps it has something to do with their ownership. Would you agree?
Yeah, and more than that, I would like to ask you, because you've been tracking this thing for so long, I'd always wondered. But I suppose, yes, the fact is that when there is a sector, there's a company which doesn't have anybody else to go to, it always has a political master to go to. And that would mean there is always a phone call to a public sector bank away. It doesn't happen that direct line, but the connections are very clear. It is something, the one very easy way of establishing that connection is to look at the insurance sector. In the insurance sector, the motor insurance, general insurance I'm talking about, is one of the worst because of the high claims ratio.
Yes.
And the motor insurance is almost predominantly handled by the public sector companies. So you see which way the coin falls.
So basically the private sector banks are smart enough to kind of either not lend to problematic sectors, or they're smart enough to get out early, but public sector banks are perhaps willy-nilly condemned to kind of continue. We've seen that happen in the case of the very famous case of Kingfisher Airlines. So what can public sector banks do, given that the government has made it very clear that we are not going to bring our stakeholding below 51%? Is it a given that public sector banks will always be dumped with, they always carry in the can and then get lambasted in the process, or is there some way out at all?
I would say that one way of very good way of looking at it is to see that who are the shareholders. As you say, it is the government, but the others who are holding it, they don't seem to be asking the questions. For other public sector companies, like Coal India has faced flack from the Children's Investment Fund.
Yes.
Similarly, ONGC has faced flack from Goldman Sachs. There has to be that sort of a question coming from other shareholders. That is not coming. So I think that could be a very good way which could help the public sector banks. Individual banks, if their chairmen are forced to come up and talk about it. I don't see any groups of shareholders really asking tough questions to their respective companies that, I mean, what are you doing with your assets? What is it? Are these really problems that have come because of the economy is not doing well, or is it that they were problems and you went in when nobody else wanted to go in? You know, that sort of thing not happening. So I think that that's where probably something could happen.
But one of the things that is also, if you look at the numbers carefully, it's also seen that these public sector banks have a rather high exposure to the infrastructure sector. Now, it is fairly well known that after the financial crisis hit, all the private banks and the foreign banks, they curtailed their lending because they knew that the economy is going for a slowdown. But we had the government officials, particularly from the finance ministry, telling public sector banks, keep lending, keep lending. Now, were they performing part of their duty to the country as such? And was it, you know, that they were just fulfilling a larger role, which perhaps commercial interest did not justify, and perhaps so because of that one should look at them a little bit more kindly rather than saying that your credit appraisal systems are bad, that you're not as efficient, you're not as nimble. Is it because we ask them to do onerous things, and then when they do it and then kind of get their hands dirty, as it were, we blame them very conveniently? So is it a bit of that also?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, that's a very good point, Mythili, that after all it is 2008-9, we had the government finance ministry coming down very strong, saying that institutional lending, there is money available, it should be lent out, it should be lent to good projects, and banks really pushed, and the credit deposit ratio went up. And not only that, you'd see that lots of projects got actually picked up. Real estate sector was the one, but even otherwise, in the road sector, the entire road funding came from the public sector bank, and that is where there is a trouble. So now to say that you guys were not looking is probably not correct. And of course, there is a point that accepting the top few public sector banks, the other banks really don't have a credit appraisal system that can really stand the test of time. I mean, this is a major issue. You have talked about it earlier in your columns also. We don't have the development financial institutions.
Yes, that seems to have been a bit of a lacuna now, because the government really allowed both ICICI as well as IDBI to become banks. And today there is there's a huge vacuum, because infrastructure typically requires long-term finance. Now, banks should not be in the business of long-term finance, but we don't have any agency to do that long-term finance. So what should we do? Is there a case once again for getting some more financial institutions like ICICI, IDBI? Should we again think of having such dedicated institutions?
I suppose so. I mean, look, because if you look at even IDFC, for instance, which was supposed to have started with the same thing, it didn't really stay on. And now, if you look at what the IDFC's appraisal, for instance, of the Delhi-Gurgaon Expressway, doesn't seem to have been really been able to come to grips with the problem. So there is an issue about getting some development institutions, financial institutions that can really understand and can do the credit appraisal for the banks. The banks really don't seem to be able to do it. They weren't supposed to do it, and they definitely are paying sort of the price for not having been able to do so.
Is part of the problem also because our legal procedures are so slow? Because precisely because our legal systems were so slow, we thought of debt recovery tribunals, and we had the Sarfazi Act. We tried to do so many things, but none of these really seem to have delivered. So what can we really do? Is there a faster asset reconstruction companies we thought of in order to enable banks to get these bad assets off their books? So what can we do? Is there a rejig of the entire recovery system that is possible, or do we send thugs after borrowers like many private sector and foreign banks often allege to do? So what can these banks really do?
Yeah, Mythili, that's possible, but I think it also has something to do with how the chairmen of many of these public sector banks are appointed. They come at the very fag end of the tenure. Often there are banks where there's a chairman, you have two chairmen in the same calendar year. Now that is asking for trouble. We have there's out of 29 banks, if you look at accepting that again the top few, the others, the pick is so peculiar, that selection process is so limited in the sense,
very opaque also,
and very opaque, that the rot, I think, starts there. This man or woman coming with very limited time doesn't know the bank in most of the cases, because as a policy they are supposed to be coming from separate banks, and then within 1 year, 1.5 years tries to do things. He leaves the place in a mess or whatever, probably hasn't improved. The next person comes along, carries the same thing. I think these banks are basically on autopilot, and that is exactly where the trouble comes in. So to expect that they wouldn't have trouble, given everything, given that the ecosystem doesn't also help them, is actually expecting, I mean, I would be surprised if something else had happened. This is exactly what was on the cards.
On that note, we'll slip into a very short break, but please stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. Women head many banks today, but there is no bank that focuses on women. Can we have a bank that lends mostly to women and women-run businesses, that supports women SHGs and women's livelihood, that employs predominantly women, and that addresses the problem of gender-related aspects of empowerment and financial inclusion? I think we can, said the FM P. Chidambaram, while announcing the government's decision to launch an all-women's bank. Unlike many other budget promises, the government has actually delivered on this one. On Tuesday, the top leadership was there present in Bombay at the formal launch of the Bharatiya Mahila Bank. Will the bank really do anything for Indian women, perhaps the most disadvantaged section of our society? Or is it just another political gimmick, a poll gimmick? We'll ask Subhomoy, but first let's hear this bureau report.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on Tuesday inaugurated the first all-women Bharatiya Mahila Bank in Mumbai. A pioneering initiative to empower women, the bank was launched with a corpus of 1,000 crore rupees to function as a universal bank. The Prime Minister called it a step in the direction of women empowerment and said a lot more needed to be done to empower women and ensure their safety.
Their social, economic and political empowerment remain a distant goal. Our government recognizes its responsibility to work diligently for the empowerment of India's women. We also recognize that our efforts in this direction must cover many dimensions.
Bharatiya Mahila Bank will be a universal bank and will provide every banking service and facility that is provided by comparable public and private sector banks. It will establish branches all over the country and in due course some branches abroad.
UPA Chairperson Sonia Gandhi in her speech recalled the contribution of Indira Gandhi towards poverty alleviation and women empowerment. She said the bank was an appropriate tribute to her memory.
There have been many events to commemorate this day, but nothing can be a more appropriate tribute to her life and work than the inauguration of the Bharatiya Mahila Bank.
Finance Minister P. Chidambaram said the bank is not a mere symbol of women empowerment but the substance of empowerment and will provide services predominantly to women and self-help groups. The board of the Mahila Bank has been constituted with the induction of 8 women members, making it the first all-women board of a PSU bank. The bank, headed by Usha Anant Subramaniam, will offer a higher rate of interest to encourage savings. Not only will it be designing special products for women, it will also create more job opportunities for women and pay special attention to rural women. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Subhomoy, symbol or substance? Very quickly, which one would you say it is?
I mean, it's something that, let's get out. We've just been talking about what the public sector banks are doing. There's another public sector bank, so let's hope this one does better.
Where was the need to have a separate women's bank?
Yeah, and I suppose what you're saying is that essentially if we look at just the public sector banks, we are saying that whatever they have written so far in their annual reports, they do include a chapter on what they've done for different sections, and so what they've said for women is obviously not adequate or up to the mark, or what they are writing is probably not correct. So which is why you need a separate bank. Yes, I mean, and after all, I suppose, I mean, we are not looking at the fact that the depositors will be screened in terms of the gender. It'll be everybody will be coming in. So essentially, it is the 28th public sector bank, and then it sort of joins the queue along with everybody else to do more or less the same thing. So it goes to the same place. And frankly speaking, other than, as you said, I mean, it's as a symbol, it's great. It might be great, but in terms of definitional change, in terms of the fact that what is it trying to do, it would have been probably been a much more interesting. There are some women's cooperative bank at the rural, at the small scale level.
We have Seva.
We've got this bank called the Mandeshi Mahila Bank. Probably it may have been a good idea if they are, if they are supposed to be good, I sort of handhold them to develop into a bigger one. Look at what these banks are doing. Those banks, their essential criteria is that they have identified not the bank, but the needs of a particular group of women, and then they sort of envelop the facilities around them. Now, if they are giving those facilities around them and then they are building up, that makes a very good case of handholding right up to a particular level. This one will be top down. You sort of go up to any part of India and then identify a self-help group and then come down on it.
No, apart from which, one of the arguments that has been made is that very often banks don't lend to women because the property is not in their name, it's in the husband's name or the father's name or the son's name. So I think that is an issue which the government would take up, because after all, even if Mahila Bank BMB were to lend, you would necessarily have to ensure that the woman has something in her name, unless collateral or whatever you're talking about. Even in the case of education loan, you would need to see, does the woman have the repaying capacity?
Yeah.
So the same yardsticks that you use to judge a loan, in the case of a loan being taken by a man, you would necessarily have to apply to a loan taken by a woman if you didn't want the loan to become an NPA. So I frankly have not really understood, but a lot of women have said that yes, it's very good, because in fact even this chairperson had said that we can give loans for kitchen, for catering enterprises, and to my mind that sounded very paternal, as if women are only good at catering enterprises, not at IT. So you would never think of giving, so I'm saying basically the catering enterprise, regardless of whether it's run by a man or a woman, should be one which is a productive investment.
Yeah, I mean it's a much better idea to have a women's bank which says that, look, I am running it not as a women's bank, but to say that women are better at banking than anybody else. So here we
are they better at banking?
No, I mean if you want to take on that's then a very dynamic way of looking at it, very positive and a very look forward sort of thing. And to say that, look, we will set up as a women's group, we will take on the advantage and the disadvantage that women would bring into it, and then we will push the envelope, and that will help. On the collateral, we talked to the chairman of the Mandeshi Mahila Bank, and what she said was that what they have done is that they have tried to staple the husband's asset whenever they give a loan to a woman who has got no collateral. So basically sort of taking a joint ownership as an acceptable evidence of holding an asset to give out loan. And apparently that is a model which Bharatiya Mahila Bank will accept going for.
Okay, because one of the arguments that has been made in favor of a bank like this is that, particularly given this in the rural areas, given our socio-cultural kind of environment, a lot of women are hesitant to go to a bank which is manned by men. So they maybe feel a little more free. But that, to my mind, could have been done just as well with all women branches, because even in the public sector banks, you have a lot of all women branches. So this perhaps, so whether this 1,000 crores equity which the government has put in, whether that could have been better utilized in something else to empower women in terms of scholarships, in terms of education, or simply in terms of even toilets, because it's one of the biggest problems that we have, that almost 60 to 70% of women in rural areas don't even have access to toilets.
I'm also concerned
so
about
I'm not very sure that this is really empowering women, but it sends a powerful signal. So does that make it, the justification for that, is it just signal, is it form, is it substance? That is.
And there's just one thing I thought that, you've set up this as a women's bank. It is by definition a women's bank. Of course, it's early days, but going ahead, supposing this bank does well. Now, there is an issue. Government has been saying that we want to do consolidation of the banking sector in the public sector. Does it, because it's a women's bank, stay separate, or does it allow for any other bank to come into it? Will that? I mean, what will be the issue? If because it's long term, but just because it's long term doesn't mean it's not an issue that needs to be looked at. Will it be allowed, or will it have a problem, or will it have to perforce therefore always stay as a separate entity? So
you'd really like to reserve your judgment on this for now. But on that note, we slip into a very short break. But please stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. Diesel prices will be deregulated in 6 months with gradual price increases, Oil Minister Veerappa Moily said in the capital on Wednesday. Perhaps only a politician can make a promise, knowing full well there's very little chance of delivering on it, especially with the general elections looming ahead. Am I being too harsh on the minister? Or is there a possibility, however bleak, that this time around the government does mean to suit action to words? We'll ask Subhomoy whether he's inclined to be more charitable. But first, let's hear this bureau report.
diesel prices are expected to be deregulated in 6 months with gradual price increases. Oil Minister Veerappa Moily said this at the KPMG Energy Conclave in Delhi. In January, the government had allowed petrol pumps to increase prices by up to 50 paise a litre every month in order to gradually remove subsidies. Moily said this had brought down losses through diesel sales to 2 rupees 5 paise a litre. But due to the depreciation of the rupee, losses soared to about 9.28 per litre. The government intends to continue the monthly increases as planned. But it says there will be no steep one-time hike of 3 to 4 rupees per litre to bridge the gap. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Subhomoy, are you willing to give the minister the benefit of doubt? Or are you going to say, well, this is just not going to happen? These are just promises that the minister makes?
It's a very smart timing. I am impressed. 6 months. It means it is going to be exactly 1st of May, which means it's just after the elections are over.
That's not his headache then.
So, it's not his headache. It is for the new government, and obviously new government will say, yes, we are committed to it.
But the government also wants to get back. So, it could, if they really win, as they say they will, then it's going to be their headache again. So, what is the whole idea?
So a new government will obviously say that yes,
examine it.
They will examine it. So, we will have another 6 months.
You know, the government's premise is based on 2 assumptions. One is, since the rupee has appreciated, of course, now we are again seeing the rupee going to depreciate. One is the rupee is appreciated. And the second is that they say oil prices are also not going to go up. How warranted are these 2 assumptions? Can we take it for granted that the rupee is going to stay stable or appreciate, and can we also assume that oil prices will not go up?
Well, as we speak, on Friday, the rupee has gone below 63. So, it's very difficult to say that the rupee will not. I mean, just the murmur in Fed that quantitative easing is going to be tapered off means has again immediately made rupee jittery.
Weaken, yes.
And so there's definitely.
So, the first assumption is gone.
So
what about the second? That will oil prices come down, or that the US has become self-sufficient with its shale oil?
It will happen, but not immediately. I mean, it's like one of those 6 months thing which Moily himself has said, and that's the advantage. The big takeaway from this announcement by Moily is that he is saying that this government has not been able to deregulate diesel prices. It was supposed to be done before the elections. By putting the 6-month deadline, he is clearly saying that it is not. We are not the guys who will be able to deregulate the diesel price fully. It will be the next government which will come in. So, the markets, the rating agencies, or anybody has to therefore look at it in that terms, that it is not this government which is deciding it, it is the other government which will now decide how the diesel prices will go. Sure, diesel prices will correspondingly, there will be slight jack up in prices over the next few months, but it is not the adjustment in diesel prices.
It's not going to be complete. Under recovery will continue, oil marketing companies will continue to make losses, and it's quite possible that we will see the oil subsidy not only shoot beyond, very much beyond the subsidies as a whole, is supposed to be limited to 2% of GDP. So, you might even see these oil companies not getting the subsidies and being rolled over for the next year. That's quite possible.
Yeah, if we are not going to give even the time, that is from now on till April of this adjustment happening, then obviously it means that there is, in addition to what is already there, there is going to be fresh additions to the subsidy burden, which means that the pressure is on. So, the next budget, the new budget that is going to be written, not the April budget, not the February budget, but the new budget of the new government will obviously have to account for the fact that there is this payment due, and then also take a call that after having made that payment, do we now have the ability to totally wipe off the slate clean and go in for a fresh regime of free pricing of oil.
But what is the government so worried about? Yes, if you raise diesel prices right now, it will raise your inflation. But if you don't do it, then ultimately it feeds into your fiscal deficit, and subsequently you will have inflation later. So, the choice really is between inflation now or inflation later. And if you have it later, not only will you have inflation, you will also have distortion in your allocation of resources, because your price signals are not influencing demand. So, surely it is better to have inflation now than inflation later, with the added disadvantage of distortion in your demand and supply.
Right, but Mythili, inflation now means election now.
But you already have inflation is so high, so and it seems there's this new theory going around, which I don't know how much you buy, that the Indian population's tolerance for inflation seems to have increased because they really are not voting out governments purely on the basis of inflation. We've seen high inflation now for almost more than 2 years, close to 3 years, and there doesn't seem to be the anger of the population against governments. So what is it? Is it just that they want to kind of, soft pedal everything before the elections? Or
inflation is a bad thing. So inflation is something that this government, and why should this government be held responsible? Any government doesn't want inflation before the election. So basically, a deregulation now would have straight hit, revolved into a inflationary spiral. And if that happens, so definitely the government doesn't want it before the elections, and we've already got so many other problems on our hand. Why allow this thing? Come along. We haven't been able to do it in the last 10 years. Why try the thing now?
Absolutely. But one more thing, that why is it that the government keeps appointing committees? Because just recently they appointed Kirit Parikh again for the second time. We've seen so many committees looking at the same issue, deregulation of oil prices. Now, if you have no intention whatsoever, is it just a question of buying time?
Yeah. I mean, more than buying time, it's a question of, it's something like what is happening with GST, that we are simply going ahead with the same issues which have already been sorted out. In GST, it was accepted at one point that petroleum will be part of GST. Now it's being taken out again, and it's again up for discussion. So I suppose it's basically showing that there is now, I mean, one shouldn't expect any major decision on any one of these major issues to happen before the elections.
So meanwhile, we'll just keep beating around the bush. So on that note, Subhomoy, we come to the end of this very interesting discussion. Thank you so much for being with us. But before we close, a quick look at the key takeaways. Well, as far as the non-performing assets of the bank is concerned, Subhomoy and I both agree it has a lot to do with the parentage of public sector banks. Because they are owned by government, they have to take on much of additional responsibility, and that really ties their hands in many ways. As far as the Bharatiya Mahila Bank is concerned, Subhomoy is much more charitable. He feels, well, we have to reserve our judgment for now. We cannot say, but it may work. One does not really know for sure. As far as oil sector deregulation is concerned, with elections coming on, there's just no way any government, not just this government, would have the courage to bite the bullet. And with that, we come to the end of this program. Thank you so much for being with us. But we'll be back same time next week. So do come back. Thank you so much.